While Clearwater Pools was resurfacing, my pool and Thomas's letter was making its way through the relevant official channels. Something was happening at 36 Aldermore Drive that I was only partially aware of in real time and came to understand more fully afterward. The tax delinquency situation, which had been building for 2 years before the August incident, did not pause because Deborah had bigger problems on her plate. The County Tax Commissioner's office had its own timeline and its own process, and that process was proceeding independently of anything Thomas or I had done. The delinquency had reached a stage where the county had issued a formal notice, a demand for payment within a specific window before the initiation of tax lien proceedings. This notice had gone out, as these notices do, through certified mail and public posting in the county legal notices section. Thomas had found reference to it when he did his thorough research, and he mentioned it to me as context, though he was clear that we had nothing to do with that process and was simply aware of it. What I did not know, during those 2 weeks of the resurfacing, was that the false police report and Thomas's documentation letter had created a secondary effect on Deborah's situation that I had not anticipated. Deborah had a mortgage. The mortgage was held by a regional bank. Mortgages, in their standard documentation, include covenants requiring the mortgagor to comply with applicable laws, maintain the property, and refrain from certain kinds of conduct that could impair the lender's security interest. Property tax delinquency is one of the things that triggers a lender's attention. Banks do not like their collateral to be at risk of a tax sale. A police report involving a false property claim attached to the address is another thing that creates a flag in a lender's property file. I'm not suggesting that I orchestrated any of this or that Thomas's letter was designed to trigger a mortgage review. What I am saying is that a complete and documented picture of the situation at 36 Aldermore Drive, made available to the relevant official parties, allowed each of those parties to see what was happening and respond according to their own obligations and processes. That is what Thomas had said it would do. That is precisely what it did. The bank, responding to the combination of the tax delinquency flag and the police report in the property file, reached out to Deborah in late August with what mortgage professionals call a servicing inquiry, a formal communication asking for clarification about the tax situation and the property record. This is standard procedure. It is not aggressive, but it is also not ignorable, because a bank's formal inquiry about your mortgage requires a response. I learned about this afterward, from a conversation I will tell you about in a later chapter. At the time, I knew none of it. I was watching my pool fill, watching Patrice swim her morning laps, watching Mia come home from camp and immediately jump in for a training set that she described as the best water she had ever been in, which made me laugh out loud standing there on the deck. The pool was just the pool again, ours, full and blue and beautiful in the late summer light. Gary Ostrowski, the HOA president, took the situation seriously, more seriously, I think, than I had expected. He called me again in the 3rd week of August to tell me that the HOA board had decided to conduct a formal review of the complaint history involving my property, specifically the 2 HOA complaints that Deborah had filed over the 4-year period and the processes by which those complaints had been handled. He said the board felt, in light of what Thomas's letter had documented about the pattern and the August police incident, that it owed a review to its members to ensure that its complaint handling procedures were not being used in bad faith. This was, I thought, exactly the right call. Not punitive toward Deborah, a review of complaint handling is not an accusation against a filer, but appropriate institutional accountability. The review took about 3 weeks. I was not part of the process. Gary kept me informed in general terms of its progress, but was appropriately careful not to involve me in the specifics, which I appreciated. The HOA had its own procedures and its own obligations to all its members, including Deborah, and I did not want to be in the position of appearing to advocate for a particular outcome. What Gary told me when the review was complete was this. The HOA board had determined that one of the 2 complaints against my property, the music complaint from 2020, had been filed with a level of specificity that suggested the filer had measured the sound level, which the board found notable given that the complaint was filed without any prior direct communication to me about the issue. The board did not characterize this as definitively bad faith, but it noted the pattern and added procedural requirements to its complaint handling going forward. Specifically, a requirement for documented evidence that the complainant had first attempted to resolve the issue directly with the neighbor before filing a formal HOA complaint. It also sent a letter to Deborah noting that her complaints against my property had been reviewed and found without merit, and that the board expected all community members to use the HOA complaint process appropriately and in good faith, as outlined in the community standards. Gary read me a portion of that letter over the phone. It was measured and professional. It was not a condemnation, but it was a formal record that the HOA had reviewed the pattern and found it problematic. On a Wednesday morning in early September, Rodriguez called me again. He said he wanted to keep me informed, which I appreciated because he didn't have to, that the matter of the August incident had been reviewed by the department. He said, choosing his words with the careful precision I had come to associate with him, that the department had determined there was sufficient basis to refer the matter to the county prosecutor's office for a review of whether charges for filing a false police report were appropriate. He was clear that referral to the prosecutor was not the same as charges being filed, and that the prosecutor would make an independent decision about whether to proceed. He said he was telling me so that I was aware and could inform my attorney, who might receive a contact from the prosecutor's office at some point if the review moved forward. I thanked him and called Thomas immediately. Thomas was unsurprised. He said that based on what Rodriguez had described, the most likely outcome was one of three things. The prosecutor would decline to file charges, determining that the public interest was not served by prosecuting what was essentially a civil neighbor dispute. The prosecutor would contact Deborah directly and offer some form of diversion or informal resolution, or least likely but possible, charges would be filed. He said that in his experience, prosecutors in situations like this tended toward the middle option, using the referral as leverage to secure a formal commitment to future behavior rather than pursuing the full criminal process. He thought that was probably the appropriate outcome and that I should be comfortable with it. I told him I agreed. I did not want Deborah prosecuted. I wanted to be left alone. Chapter 16, September. September in Claremont is one of my favorite months. The worst of the Georgia summer heat breaks, usually sometime in the first 2 weeks, and the afternoons become the particular warm but bearable temperature that makes outdoor time feel like a gift rather than an endurance test. The light changes. The quality of the evenings changes. You start to feel like the year is turning towards something. Mia went back to school and back to her training schedule. She was in the pool every morning before school, 5:30 a.m. in the dark, the pool lights on, her lane line moving in the water. I would sometimes get up to watch her for a few minutes before going back to bed. Not to supervise, not to interfere, just to watch. A parent thing. The particular satisfaction of watching your child do the thing they love with skill and dedication and joy. Patris swam in the early afternoon, when the sun was at its best angle for the pool and the water temperature was perfect. She had a routine that she had developed over 4 years and that fit her body's needs precisely: 30 minutes of easy laps, 10 minutes of specific stretching exercises in the water that her physical therapist had designed, 10 minutes of whatever felt good. She told me once that those 50 minutes every afternoon were the best 50 minutes of her day. As a person who loves her and has watched her manage the chronic discomfort of rheumatoid arthritis for 15 years with more grace than I could have managed, hearing her say that meant more than I can easily put into words. The new plaster surface of the pool by September had cured to its final appearance, a clean, bright white that gave the water a clarity and vividness that the older surface had gradually lost over 4 years. The pool looked new, better than new actually, because the landscaping and the pergola and the accumulated small personal touches of 4 years of use gave it the character that a brand new installation never quite has. Deborah in September was quiet, I did not see her at the fence. I did not receive any complaints. I did not hear from her attorney if she had won. The house next door went about its business with no interaction with ours, which was exactly what I had always wanted. Chapter 17, The Unexpected Development. In the third week of September, something happened that I had not anticipated and that I want to tell you about carefully, because it is the part of the story that changed my understanding of the whole thing. Thomas called me on a Thursday afternoon and told me that he had heard from a colleague, a real estate attorney in Claremont who handled transactions on both sides of deals in the neighborhood, that 36 Aldermore Drive had been listed for sale. I said nothing for a moment. Thomas said, based on the tax delinquency situation and the mortgage review that was apparently triggered, she may have decided that selling is a better outcome than trying to resolve both issues while staying in the house. That's a judgment only she could make. But the listing is real. It went up this morning. I pulled up the listing on my phone after we hung up. There it was, 36 Aldermore Drive, 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, listed at $320,000. The listing photos showed a clean, well-maintained house. The kitchen had been updated at some point. The backyard was the simple, unmemorable rectangle that I had always seen from my side of the fence. No pool. I looked at the listing for a while. I thought about Thomas's question from our first conversation. What would it have meant for her financially if she could have attached a claim to the pool? I thought about the $74,000 assessed value difference between our properties. I thought about Deborah watching through the window 4 years ago. I thought about Patrice swimming her morning laps, Mia in the pre-dawn dark, her stroke visible through the pool lights. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. I felt something more complicated, a kind of sadness that is separate from regret. Not regret about anything I had done, but sadness about the full shape of the situation, about a person who had watched something beautiful exist next door for 4 years while her own situation quietly deteriorated, who had made increasingly bad decisions in response to that pain, and who was now, at the end of it, selling her home. That is a human story. Even when the person at the center of it caused real problems for your family, it is a human story. Chapter 18, The Conversation. 2 weeks after the listing went up, in early October, on a Saturday morning, the kind that feels like September's better, cooler cousin, there was a knock at my front door. I opened it and found Deborah Finch standing on my porch. She was dressed more casually than I had ever seen her, jeans, a plain jacket, no particular effort made with her appearance. She looked tired, not defeated, not broken, but tired in the way of someone who has been carrying something heavy for a long time. She said, "Elliot, I wonder if I could talk to you for a few minutes." I looked at her for a moment, then I stepped back and let her in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had sat with Rodriguez and Chen 2 months earlier. Patrice was not home. I offered coffee and Deborah accepted. She sat with her hands wrapped around the mug for a moment before she spoke. "I want to tell you I'm sorry," she said, "for August, for all of it actually, the complaints, the years of it." She looked at the table. "I don't have a good explanation. I have explanations, but I don't think they're good enough, and I don't think you need to hear them." I looked at her. I thought about Patrice's words, that it must have been its own kind of misery, watching something exist next door that you couldn't have. I said, "You don't have to explain, but I'd like to understand if you're willing." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "When you built the pool, she stopped, started again. I was having financial difficulties that I hadn't told anyone about. I'd made some investments that hadn't worked out the way I expected. I was managing it, or trying to, and then the pool went in next door. And every time I looked at it," she stopped again. "I don't know how to say this without sounding terrible." "Try," I said, not unkindly. "Every time I looked at it, I thought about what my house was worth compared to yours, about the gap, about the fact that I was losing ground in one direction while you were gaining it in another. And I know that is not your problem. I know you don't owe me anything. I know the pool is yours and you had every right to build it. But feelings aren't always rational, and I wasn't in a rational place, and I kept finding ways to make the pool a problem because I didn't know what else to do with what I was feeling. She looked at her coffee cup. The August thing was, she said, I don't know what I thought was going to happen. I think I was in a bad enough place that I wasn't thinking clearly at all. I panicked, and I did something very stupid, and it made everything worse, which I suppose I deserved. The kitchen was quiet. I thought about what to say. I thought about the right thing. Not the easy thing, not the satisfying thing, but the right thing. Deborah, I said, I'm not going to pretend the last 4 years were easy. They weren't. Some of it was harder than you know, not just for me, but for Patris and Mia. The complaints, the police call, those things had costs. I paused. But I believe you're telling me the truth right now. And I'm sorry about the financial situation. I mean that genuinely. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. She looked up at me. I hope the house sells quickly, I said. I hope you find somewhere that works better for you. And I hope, wherever you land, things get easier. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, thank you. She finished her coffee. She left. I stood at the kitchen window and watched her walk back down my driveway and across the lawn to her house. Biscuit? No, that's the other story. No dog. She just went inside and the door closed behind her. I stood there for a while, and then I went out to the backyard and sat in a pergola chair beside the pool and looked at the water in the October morning light. The house at 36 Aldermore Drive sold in late November. I know the sale price because it is public record, $308,000, slightly below asking, which is normal for a fall closing in this market. Based on what Thomas had told me about the tax delinquency amount and the general status of the mortgage, the sale would have covered those obligations and left Deborah with something, though not a great deal. New owners moved in 2 weeks before Christmas. A couple in their late 30s with a large, enthusiastic mixed-breed dog and a toddler who spent the first several weeks in the new house clearly stunned by the amount of backyard available. Their names were Mike and Jenna. They introduced themselves the first weekend, knocked on our door, brought their dog, who immediately and inappropriately tried to lick Patris's entire face, which Patris handled with the grace that is characteristic of her. Mike and Jenna were, within about 15 minutes of meeting them, the kind of neighbors you feel immediately lucky to have. Easy, warm, the kind of people who wave from the driveway and mean it. Their dog is named Chester. Chester has a particular relationship with the fence between our properties that involves him pressing his face into it and staring at the pool with an expression of longing that I find deeply relatable. I have told Mike that when the weather is right in the summer, they are welcome to use the pool. Mia will be away at college by June, and while she will certainly use it when she visits, the pool will have more open hours than it used to. Mike said that was incredibly generous and that Chester would lose his mind. That will probably be true, but the pool is used for losing your mind in the best possible sense. That is part of what pools are for. Chapter 20, What Mia Said. I want to tell you about a conversation I had with Mia before she left for college. She had heard broadly, in the filtered way that teenagers hear things about their parents' lives, about what had happened over the summer. The police visit, the documentation, the lawyer. She had not been here for the August incident, having been at swim camp, and I had given her the general shape of events without getting into all the details. But she knew enough, and one evening in late September, she came and sat with me on the pergola while I was reading, and after a while she said, "Dad, can I ask you something?" I said yes. She said, "Why didn't you ever just tell her to stop? Like years ago, why did you let it go on so long?" I thought about that. It is a version of the question that I had asked myself many times, and I want to try to give you an honest answer because I think it matters. I told Mia that I had asked myself the same question, that there had been a period of years where I had told myself that each incident was isolated, that it would pass, that direct confrontation would make things worse rather than better, that reasonable behavior on my part would eventually be met with reasonable behavior in return. I told her I had been wrong about that. I told her that the reluctance to escalate, to push back formally, to insist on consequences, that reluctance came from a place that felt virtuous, felt like the kind of patience and restraint that are good values in a person. But that restraint without limits is not always a virtue, that there is a difference between choosing your battles and never choosing any battle at all. That when someone repeatedly, systematically uses official processes in bad faith against you, absorbing it in the name of avoiding conflict is not nobility. It is a strategy that does not work and that, over time, costs you and the people you love. Mia listened to all of this and then said, in the way she has, which is like a much older person living briefly in a teenager's body. So the thing to do is figure out earlier what the actual situation is. Instead of hopping, it will become a different situation. I said yes, that was exactly it. She nodded, looked at the pool for a moment, and then said, good swim today, new surface is great, way better than before. And she got up and went inside. Chapter 21, The Pool in December. I want to tell you what the pool looks like in December, because I think it's important to know that a pool is not only what it is in July. In December in Georgia, we close the pool for winter, lower the water level, add winterizing chemicals, cover it with a safety cover that I secure around the perimeter with water bags and anchors. It takes a few hours, and I have gotten efficient at it over 4 years. The covered pool sits in the backyard through the winter like a slumbering thing, waiting for April. But before it goes under cover every year, there is usually a last swim. The last warm enough day of fall. This year it was a Sunday in early November, 61 degrees and sunny, the kind of day that feels like a gift from October, and I take the cover off, check the chemistry, and swim. Alone, usually, a quiet, meditative last swim of the season. The water is cold. Not dangerously cold, probably 65 degrees, but cold enough that the first minute is a physiological adjustment, and the second minute is a kind of fierce, alive clarity that you can only get from cold water. I swam that last swim this year and got out and stood on the deck in the November sun and thought about the year. The empty pool in August, Rodriguez on my porch, the kitchen table with the documentation folder, the coffee with Deborah, the new surface, white and bright, Mia's morning practices in the dark, Patris coming in from her afternoon swim with that particular ease in how she moved. The pool had been the subject of a claim so absurd that a police officer had laughed before catching himself. It had been the center of 4 years of friction and one very stupid Tuesday morning in August. It had been, at various moments, a source of stress and documentation and attorney fees and conversations I would rather not have had. And it had also been, every single day it was in use, exactly what I built it to be. I covered it for winter the following weekend. I will uncover it in April, when the water warms enough for Patris's joints, when Mia is home for spring break, when Chester the dog will press his face to the fence with his longing expression, and we will probably end up inviting Mike and Jenna over to let him swim. It will be there, it is mine, it is not going anywhere. Chapter 22, What I Know Now. I have been thinking about what this story means, and I want to try to say it honestly. The obvious lesson, document everything, know your rights, don't let bad faith conduct go unanswered, is real. If you live next to someone who files false complaints, false police reports, false property claims, the answer is not to absorb it indefinitely in the hope that it will stop. It probably won't stop until something makes it stop. Documentation, legal counsel, and making sure the full picture is visible to the people who need to see it, those things work. Not quickly, not without cost, but they work. But I want to say something beyond the obvious lesson, because I think the obvious lesson by itself leaves out the part of the story that actually matters most. Deborah Finch was not a villain. She was a person in a desperate situation who made a series of bad decisions, and those decisions had a logic to them, a painful, human, understandable logic, even when they were wrong. The 4 years of complaints were wrong. The August police call was deeply wrong. There is no version of the story where those things were acceptable or excusable. But they were human, and understanding that they were human, understanding the fear and the financial pressure and the complicated feelings of watching something beautiful exist next door while your own situation crumbled, does not require me to forgive everything or pretend the harm wasn't real. It just requires me to hold the full picture instead of the simple one. The full picture is always more complicated than the simple one, but it is also, I have found, more useful. It tells you more about what actually happened and why, and it tends to lead toward better outcomes than the simple picture does. I am a history teacher. My entire professional life is organized around the principle that understanding why things happened, really understanding, not just cataloging events, but understanding the forces and choices and conditions that produced them, is more valuable than simply knowing that they happened. That principle applies in classrooms and in life. It applies to the story of my pool and my neighbor and the Tuesday morning in August. I learned things from all of this that I will carry for a long time, about patience and its limits, about documentation and why it matters, about the difference between conflict avoidance and the kind of quiet, thorough, unspectacular, but absolutely determined assertion of your own rights that doesn't require you to be angry, but does require you to be awake. And I learned something about the pool itself, about what it means to build something that matters to your family, something that changes your wife's mornings and your daughter's trajectory and the quality of summer evenings in your backyard, and then to have that thing challenged and to discover, through the challenge, how much it means, how worth defending it is, how uninterested you are in letting anything or anyone diminish it. The pool is 32 feet long and 16 feet wide. The water is as blue as it has ever been, under the December cover, waiting for April. It is mine. It was always mine. Chapter 23, One morning in April. I want to end with something simple. The spring after all of this, in April, I took the cover off the pool for the first time, checked the chemistry, started the heater. By the second week of April, the water was warm enough. Patris swam the first morning. I watched from the pergola with coffee, the way I always do. She did her 30 laps, her stretching, her 10 minutes of whatever felt good. When she got out, she stood on the deck for a moment in her bathrobe, looking at the water the way she always does at the end, like she's checking that it's still there, still beautiful, still hers. She looked over at me. I raised my coffee cup. She smiled. Mike and Jenna came over that first warm weekend in May. Chester jumped in before anyone had officially said it was swim time and created a wave that soaked Jenna's shorts and made Mike laugh so hard he had to sit down. Mia, home for a weekend visit, timed Chester's laps with her phone and announced that he was a slower swimmer than the slowest member of her college team, but faster than her high school coach, which she seemed to find deeply satisfying. The afternoon light hit the water the way it does in May in Georgia, from a high angle, making the whole surface seem to glow from within. The pool was exactly what I built it to be. The pool was exactly what it had always been. Clapper board outro, closing 2 camera. So that is the story of a drained pool, 2 police officers, a folder full of documentation, and 11 days that unraveled 4 years of bad faith conduct and revealed the full, complicated human story underneath all of it. That is the story of what happens when you build something for the people you love, and someone challenges it, and you discover, through the challenge, exactly how much it matters and exactly how far you will go to protect it. If you are dealing with a neighbor who files false complaints, makes false claims, tries to use official processes as a weapon against you, document everything from day one, talk to an attorney early, don't absorb it indefinitely, and understand that the full picture, made visible to the right people, tends to create its own consequences without you having to be the one doing the punishing. Your home is yours, your property is yours, your pool or your garden or your wall or whatever you have built with patience and love is yours. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. I'm Elliot Shaw, and the pool is full, and Patris is swimming, and Chester is probably at the fence right now. Subscribe if this story meant something to you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment. I want to know your story. See you in the next one. Framed thumbnail text, OPTONS. 10 words or less forces the click. Option 1, asterisk she called cops claiming my pool was hers. Big mistake. Option 2, Asterisk I drained my pool. Neighbor called police. It backfired badly. Option 3. Asterisk neighbor claimed my pool. Documents destroyed her completely. Option 4. Asterisk she said my pool was hers. Officer literally laughed. Option 5. Strongest. Use this one. She told cops my pool was hers. Her whole life unraveled. Total word count, both parts combined. Approximately 17,100 words, white heavy check mark. Script complete, ready for voiceover recording. Character name used, Elliot Shaw unique, different from Daniel Mercer and Raymond Cole. Next story, send new title, new unique character name assigned automatically.